For years now, HTC has been the underdog player that you just want to root for, and that's been aided by its excellent phones like the U11. But no matter what the company tries, it can't seem to regain its place in the spotlight. The company's latest phone, the U12 Plus, looks great on paper, but a few key flaws could ruin the overall experience. The U12 Plus is a showcase of HTC's engineering prowess. It's just gorgeous, especially in this translucent blue finish that HTC will be pushing to most markets, which lets you take a peek at the internals of the phone. The U12 Plus uses HTC's liquid surface design language, which features a rounded backing and highly reflective surfaces. That glossy coating makes the U12 Plus crazy slippery though. It slides around on tables, and I almost lost it at the airport after it fell out of my pocket when I was just sitting down. Still, it's a great looking modern design. There's a circular fingerprint sensor on the back sitting under HTC's first dual camera array in years. There's no headphone jack, sorry, but if you don't want to use Bluetooth headphones, HTC at least includes a pair of USB-C headphones in the box. Around the front, the huge 6-inch display feels manageable thanks to trim bezels and an 18:9 aspect ratio, and there's no notch occupying space by the notification bar. On the topic of that display, it's a Quad HD Super LCD 6 panel with support for the P3 and sRGB color spaces, as well as HDR10. It's a great display that's plenty visible in direct sunlight and less susceptible to burn-in than AMOLED. The U12 Plus is no slouch internally either, with a Snapdragon 845 processor and 6GB of RAM. You'll have to choose between 64 and 128GB of storage, but you can expand either option with a micro SD card. There's also a sizable 3500 mAh battery inside, which I found plenty good for my use. Don't expect Mate 10 Pro or Key 1 level battery life here, but I easily managed 4 to 5 hours of screen on time in my testing. So here's the big downside of the phone though, at least on the units that my colleague Alex and I tested. The power and volume buttons along the right hand side of the U12 Plus aren't actually buttons at all. HTC calls them digital buttons, and they don't move when you press them. They're more like the Force Touch trackpad on a MacBook, where they sense when you press down on them and the phone vibrates to emulate a click. When I first tried them out, I thought the digital buttons were a neat idea, but in reality, they're wildly inconsistent. The volume up button on my unit takes a lot of pressure to register, while the power button is so touchy that the phone has actually restarted a few times in my hand and pocket, thinking I was holding it down. Making matters worse, you can't adjust the sensitivity in the settings. It really makes the U12 Plus frustrating to operate as a whole, and I just can't see this being better than real buttons for, well, anybody. We also need to talk about EdgeSense 2. If you've used an HTC U11 or a Pixel 2, you're probably familiar with HTC's EdgeSense tech. Just squeeze the sides of your phone to launch any number of shortcuts, from talking to Google Assistant or Amazon Alexa, to launching your camera, pulling down the notification shade, and so on. That's all gotten a bit of an overhaul with the U12 Plus. You can further customize your shortcuts now, and the U12 Plus can even detect a double tap for an added shortcut. That's all great in theory, but again, HTC underdelivered. Even at the lowest setting, I almost never found the sweet spot for EdgeSense on the first try, and more often than not, I ended up death gripping my phone and still not activating the intended shortcut. Other times, the EdgeSense graphic would show up on my screen when I'm just holding the phone like normal, and the double tap, while really nice when it works, only works about half the time. Now listen, this could all be fixed with a software update, and hopefully it will be soon, but in the meantime, I think you're better off just disabling EdgeSense altogether. The one EdgeSense feature I really enjoyed though was Smart Rotate, which uses the U12 Plus's edge detection to understand when you're holding the phone vertically and automatically locks the orientation and prevents the screen from timing out. Onto the software, the Sense interface hasn't changed much at all since the HTC 10, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. While I don't love that you still can't get rid of the app drawer icon in the dock, that seems like a pretty fair trade-off to me, considering there's virtually no bloatware in sight. HTC is sticking to its strategy of using as many Google apps as possible. That means Google Photos is your default gallery, Play Music is your default media player, and so on. That doesn't mean there aren't still a few custom settings added though, including a quick and easy to set up face unlock that works great as an alternative to the fingerprint sensor, as well as music and theater toggles for the excellent boom sound speakers. HTC Blink Feed still sits to the left of the home screens rather than Google Now, for better or worse, but as always, you can just disable it if you don't like it, and the software is so clean that with the right third-party launcher, you could almost forget that you're not using a Pixel. Now look, I know I've been pretty down on the U12 Plus so far, but here's where it gets better. In fact, this is where it gets really great. The cameras. HTC is using a stabilized 12 megapixel f1.75 primary sensor this time around, with a 16 megapixel f2.6 telephoto lens for backup. This lets you go wide or get up close to your subject without having to move between shots, and boy those shots, just take a look at some of these. The U12 Plus makes use of HDR boost post-processing to pull off some really amazing dynamic range and natural looking colors, and you get a ton of depth in your shots too. Though, as always, you can take it a step further by enabling portrait mode, which works on the two rear cameras and the two front cameras. That second lens up front is identical to the first, both 8 megapixel f2.0 sensors capable of shooting 1080p video. Now, on to the unpleasant final thoughts. Look, I've been a fan of HTC's phones for years, and I really want to see the company succeed, but this just isn't a phone I can recommend to most people. The cameras are stellar and the software is clean, but that's true of plenty of other phones in the U12 Plus's price range, and even well below. Until HTC irons out the glaring issues with the digital buttons and EdgeSense 2, the U12 Plus is just too inconsistent and frustrating to operate to justify an $800 price tag. That story may be a little different in the future when these issues are hopefully fixed by a software update, but until then, you're probably better off spending that $800 elsewhere. That about wraps up my feelings on the U12 Plus, but for a more detailed take, head on over to AndroidCentral.com to read what Alex Doby thinks about the phone. If you enjoyed this video, there's a big red subscribe button down below. Click it to see more videos like this, and until next time, thanks so much for watching.